Women are begging men to cash app them money. In a world that once promised endless opportunity and equality for all, something profound has shifted beneath the surface. Men across the country and around the globe have begun to step back from the traditional roles they once embraced without question. Women who built their identities around independence and career success now face a different reality, one marked by financial strain and unexpected challenges in daily living. What if the very choices celebrated for decades have led to a moment where the support systems many took for granted simply are not there anymore? Stick with me through this entire discussion because by the end, you will see how these patterns affect not just dating and relationships, but the broader structure of society itself, and why so many men have decided that peace and solitude offers more value than the old expectations ever could. Now, let us get into the heart of what is happening. Picture this: for years, society pushed a powerful narrative that celebrated women stepping fully into the workforce, pursuing advanced degrees, climbing corporate ladders, and declaring complete financial independence from any reliance on traditional partnership structures. That message spread far and wide through media, education, and cultural conversations. Young women heard it repeated so often that it became almost unquestioned truth. They invested their most vibrant years into building resumes, accumulating credentials, and chasing promotions with the belief that this path would deliver security, fulfillment, and freedom on their own terms. Many delayed starting families or even considering long term commitments because the priority remained career growth and personal achievement above all else. The promise felt empowering at the time. It suggested that women could have it all without compromise, that the old models of mutual support in relationships had become outdated relics no longer necessary in a modern, enlightened age. Yet, as time moved forward and economic pressures mounted, cracks began to appear in that carefully constructed image. Inflation continued its steady rise. The cost of housing, groceries, utilities, transportation, and basic daily needs climbed higher each year, while wages for many positions failed to keep pace in meaningful ways. Student loan balances grew heavier for those who pursued higher education with enthusiasm, but without clear pathways to rapid payoff. Personal debt from credit cards, car payments, and lifestyle expenses added layers of strain that became harder to manage alone. Suddenly, the independent lifestyle that once looked liberating started to reveal its vulnerabilities when faced with the raw realities of sustaining everything solo in a high cost environment. Women who had embraced the girl boss ideal with full conviction now found themselves approaching their 30s and 40s without the family structures, spousal support, or shared financial responsibilities that previous generations often relied upon during difficult periods. The workforce participation delivered experience and income for some, but for many, it also meant trading away the prime years typically associated with building stable homes and raising children. This shift did not happen in isolation. Men observed these changes with growing awareness. They watched as cultural messages increasingly portrayed traditional masculine traits as problematic or unnecessary. Terms emerged that framed everyday male behaviors in negative lights, from how men sat in public spaces to how they initiated conversations or provided in relationships. Legal systems in areas like family court, divorce proceedings, and civil matters sometimes appeared stacked in ways that extracted resources from men long after relationships ended, creating lasting financial and emotional burdens. Stories circulated of men facing false accusations, public shaming through social media recordings, or professional damage from group discussions that labeled and criticized their dating histories without full context. Paternity issues raised questions about trust and accountability in ways that left many men feeling exposed to risks without adequate protections. Over time, these experiences accumulated. Men began to recognize patterns where their efforts in dating, providing, or simply engaging often led to one sided dynamics rather than mutual respect and shared growth. Instead of continuing down paths that felt increasingly unbalanced, large numbers of men started making different choices. They stepped back from the constant pursuit of romantic validation or the pressure to prove their worth through financial displays. They redirected their energy towards self improvement, skill development, financial discipline, and personal passions that brought genuine satisfaction without external drama. Some focused on fitness and health, building physical strength and mental resilience through consistent routines. Others poured time into career advancement, side businesses, or creative pursuits that aligned with their own sense of purpose. Minimalism appealed to many because it allowed them to strip away unnecessary complications and concentrate resources on what truly mattered for their own well being. Solitude, once feared by some as loneliness, revealed itself as a space for peace, reflection, and authentic self discovery. Men realized they could enjoy their own company, maintain meaningful friendships, pursue hobbies, and experience fulfillment without the expectation of constantly managing someone else's emotional or financial needs. This collective stepping back created visible ripples. On social media platforms, certain patterns emerged where women began sharing stories of financial difficulty and expressing frustration with the dating landscape. Some openly discussed the challenges of covering rent, bills, or daily expenses without additional support. Others described difficulties in finding partners willing to invest time, attention, or resources in the ways once considered standard. Conversations appeared about the rising cost of living and how it impacted single households more intensely. Women who had once confidently declared they needed no one started to voice a different kind of reality, one where independence met the limits of economic pressure and personal bandwidth. These discussions highlighted a growing awareness that the workforce focused path, while offering certain freedoms, also carried trade offs in stability and support networks during harder seasons. Men, having already adjusted their approach, continued forward with quiet determination. They stopped initiating contact at the previous levels. They declined to engage in transactional dating scenarios where expectations felt mismatched from the start. They chose not to send funds or cover expenses when it seemed disconnected from genuine mutual interest or long term compatibility. This was not born from anger or revenge, but from a clear eyed assessment of observable outcomes and personal boundaries. Men learned to trust their own experiences and pattern recognition rather than external narratives that promised rewards for continued effort. They saw that many modern interactions carried hidden costs in time, energy, and resources without delivering proportional value in return. As a result, they prioritized their own peace and long term security over the role of perpetual provider or emotional regulator. The economic backdrop amplified these personal decisions. Across the country, the cost of living pressed on every household. Housing prices remained elevated in many regions, with median rents for modest apartments climbing year after year. Utility bills fluctuated with seasonal demands, sometimes reaching surprising highs during extreme weather. Grocery expenses for basic nutritious food added consistent pressure, especially for those managing budgets alone. Transportation costs, including fuel, maintenance, and vehicle payments, consumed large portions of monthly income. Many individuals carried student debt or credit card balances that required ongoing attention just to stay current. These pressures affected everyone, but they landed differently depending on household structure and support systems. Single individuals without shared responsibilities often felt the weight more acutely when no second income or division of tasks existed to ease the load. In this environment, men who had walked away from unbalanced dynamics found unexpected advantages in their choices. By maintaining lower overhead and focusing resources inward, they created buffers against inflation and uncertainty. They avoided the expenses associated with frequent dating, gift giving, or supporting lifestyles beyond their own. Their minimalist approaches allowed savings to grow or investments to compound without constant drain. Peace of mind replaced the stress of navigating complex social expectations. Many reported improved mental clarity, better sleep, and stronger focus on goals once they released the pressure to perform traditional provider roles without reciprocity. They rediscovered simple pleasures in solitude, whether through reading, exercise, creative projects, or time spent in nature. The absence of constant relational negotiation freed up enormous energy for self mastery and purpose driven activities. Women, facing these shifts, began to express confusion and frustration in public forums. Some wondered aloud why fewer men seemed interested in traditional dating rituals. Others shared stories of repeated ghosting after initial conversations or meetings. Discussions emerged about the difficulty of securing commitments or even basic attention from men who once pursued more actively. A sense of surprise appeared in some accounts, as if the cultural script had promised a different outcome. Women who had invested heavily in career paths and personal branding now confronted the reality that financial independence did not automatically translate into emotional or practical support during challenging periods. The workforce delivered paychecks for many, but it could not replace the shared burdens or mutual encouragement that stable partnerships historically provided in tougher economic times. Men observed these expressions without rushing to re engage. They had heard similar narratives before and recognized the patterns. Past experiences taught them that temporary appeals for help often reverted to old dynamics once immediate pressures eased. They chose instead to maintain their boundaries with consistency. This was not about punishing anyone, but about honoring their own hard won lessons. Men understood that true compatibility required alignment in values, accountability, and long term vision rather than reactive support during crises. They focused on building lives that felt sustainable and fulfilling on their own terms, knowing that any future partnership would need to enhance rather than complicate that foundation. Story after story illustrated the broader trend. Consider the young professional who spent her 20s climbing the corporate ladder, earning promotions and enjoying the social freedom that came with financial earnings. She traveled, networked, and built an impressive resume while putting family plans on hold. As she entered her mid 30s, rising living costs began to erode the comfort of her single income. Rent increases, healthcare expenses, and the steady accumulation of debt created monthly calculations that felt tighter than expected. Dating attempts yielded short term connections, but no stable partnerships willing to share responsibilities. She noticed that many men her age seemed focused on their own paths, less inclined to step into provider roles without clear mutual commitment. The independence she once celebrated now required navigating every expense and decision without a teammate, leading to moments of quiet reflection about the trade offs involved. Another account involved a woman who embraced the entrepreneurial spirit, launching side hustles and content creation while maintaining a day job. She promoted messages of female empowerment and self sufficiency to her audience. During strong economic periods, her income supported a vibrant lifestyle. When market shifts and increased competition reduced earnings, the reality of solo responsibilities hit harder. Bills continued arriving, regardless of content performance or client flow. Attempts to seek support through dating circles revealed that many men had grown cautious about financial entanglement early on. They preferred clear communication and demonstrated compatibility before investing resources. This created friction in interactions where expectations did not align from the beginning. The woman found herself adapting to stricter budgeting, exploring additional income streams, and reconsidering long term life strategies in light of these new dynamics. Men shared parallel stories from their perspective, though often with different conclusions. One man described years spent in relationships where he covered most expenses, planned outings, and provided emotional support while receiving inconsistent reciprocity. After repeated cycles of investment followed by sudden shifts or conflicts, he decided to pause and focus inward. He redirected the money previously spent on dates into his own savings and skill development. He invested time in fitness, learning new trades, and building a small network of like minded friends. The solitude brought clarity. He realized that his happiness did not depend on constant external validation or the role of rescuer. Over time, his financial position strengthened, his stress levels dropped, and his sense of purpose deepened. When occasional dating opportunities arose, he approached them with higher standards and clearer boundaries, unwilling to repeat patterns that previously drained his resources and energy without balanced return. These individual journeys multiplied across communities. Men in various age groups, professions, and locations began comparing notes through private conversations or online forums. They recognized shared experiences of legal risks in family matters, social pressures that framed masculinity as inherently suspect, and cultural shifts that celebrated female independence while questioning male contributions. Rather than fighting these currents, many chose strategic withdrawal. They stopped overextending in dating markets that felt rigged against their long term interests. They declined to participate in social media dynamics designed to shame or extract without accountability. They focused instead on observable reality, trusting actions, and consistent behaviors over promises or temporary appeals. The economic data supported the geopersonal observations. Reports indicated that household debt levels continued climbing nationally, with many individuals relying on credit for everyday essentials. Housing affordability strained budgets in both urban and suburban areas. Utility and transportation costs added layers of pressure that single income households felt acutely. Food prices rose steadily, forcing careful meal planning and occasional compromises on nutrition. For those without shared living arrangements or spousal income, the math of daily survival required constant attention and discipline. Men who embraced minimalism and self reliance often navigated these pressures with greater buffers because they avoided lifestyle inflation tied to relationship maintenance or provider expectations. Women navigating the same economy sometimes expressed surprise at the reduced willingness of men to absorb extra costs. Stories circulated of dating experiences where men suggested splitting expenses or keeping activities low cost from the outset. Some women interpreted this as lack of interest or generosity, while others began to reflect on the sustainability of previous models. The conversation gradually turned toward personal financial literacy, career strategies that offered better stability, and realistic assessments of independence in a high cost world. Not all women faced identical situations, of course. Some maintained strong careers and support networks that buffered them effectively. Others adapted by building skills, cutting expenses, or forming new alliances with friends or family. The broader trend, however, highlighted a growing recognition that solo navigation carried real limits when inflation and living costs outpaced individual earnings for extended periods. Men, meanwhile, continued refining their approach. They invested in education, whether formal or self directed, to increase earning potential or create passive income streams. They built physical and mental resilience through consistent habits that compounded over time. They cultivated hobbies and interests that provided joy without requiring external approval. Many discovered that solitude allowed deeper self acceptance and reduced the noise of conflicting expectations. They learned to enjoy their own presence without feeling incomplete. This internal security translated into stronger boundaries and clearer decision making in all areas of life, including any future interactions with potential partners. As these patterns solidified, cultural commentators and everyday observers noted the shift. Discussions emerged about the long term implications for family formation, birth rates, and social structures. Some worried about delayed partnerships and their effects on community stability. Others pointed to the importance of individual accountability and realistic expectations on all sides. Men emphasized that their withdrawal stemmed not from hatred or defeat, but from a rational response to incentives and experiences. They wanted relationships built on mutual respect, shared values, and balanced contributions rather than one sided provision or emotional labor. Women who recognized these preferences began adjusting their own strategies, focusing more on self sufficiency, clear communication, and demonstrating value beyond surface level appeals. The story continues to unfold in real time. Every day brings new examples of individuals adapting to these changed dynamics. Men who once felt pressured to chase now move with quiet confidence in their chosen paths. Women confronting economic realities often develop greater resourcefulness and strategic thinking about their futures. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Society as a whole wrestles with the question of what balanced, sustainable relationships look like in an era of high cost and shifting expectations. The men who walked away did not disappear into bitterness. Many thrived in their solitude, building lives of purpose, discipline, and genuine contentment. They proved through actions that peace and self mastery remain accessible, even when traditional scripts no longer fit the current chapter. This brings us to a deeper reflection on personal agency. Every man who chose solitude made that decision based on his unique set of experiences and observations. He weighed the costs of continued participation against the benefits of stepping back. He considered the risks involved in legal, financial, and emotional domains. He examined whether the rewards justified the investment of time, money, and energy. For many, the honest answer pointed towards self focus as the wiser course in the current environment. This choice allowed them to avoid repeating cycles that previously led to frustration or loss. It created space for growth that felt authentic rather than performative. In time, some may open themselves to new connections if the conditions align with their values. Others may find lasting satisfaction in the independent path they have forged. Women facing similar economic pressures tell their own stories of adaptation. Some return to education or skill building to enhance earning power. Others explore entrepreneurship or side ventures that offer flexibility. Many prioritize budgeting, debt reduction, and lifestyle adjustments that promote stability without reliance on external rescue. These efforts demonstrate resilience and a willingness to confront reality directly. The conversation benefits when both sides acknowledge the structural challenges while taking ownership of personal decisions. Inflation does not discriminate by gender, nor does the rising cost of essentials. Navigating it requires clear thinking, disciplined habits, and realistic planning, regardless of relationship status. Looking back at the decades that led here, certain patterns stand out with clarity. Cultural narratives once emphasized female empowerment through workforce participation and delayed family formation. These ideas carry genuine opportunities for education and career growth. At the same time, they sometimes downplayed the practical value of mutual support structures and long term stability. Men received mixed messages about their role, celebrated as providers in some contexts, yet criticized as toxic or unnecessary in others. Legal and social frameworks evolved in ways that increased perceived risks for men entering committed relationships. Over time, the cumulative effect encouraged many to reassess their level of involvement. They chose self preservation and peace over continued participation in systems that felt unbalanced. The economic cost of living crisis added urgency to these personal calculations. When monthly expenses consume the majority of income, the margin for supporting additional responsibilities shrinks dramatically. Men who recognized this math early protected their resources and mental energy. They avoided scenarios where dating or relationships became another form of financial strain without clear reciprocity. This protective instinct, while sometimes labeled negatively in public discourse, simply reflected rational self interest in a challenging environment. Women experiencing parallel pressures often discovered similar limits to solo independence when facing the full weight of housing, healthcare, transportation, and daily necessities without shared burdens. Storytelling helps illuminate these dynamics without judgment. Imagine a man in his late 20s who spent several years in relationships where he consistently covered dates, gifts, and occasional assistance with expenses. He believed this demonstrated care and commitment. Over time, he noticed that the effort rarely translated into deeper loyalty or shared planning for the future. Conflicts arose around expectations, and breakups sometimes involved additional financial or legal complications. After the third such cycle, he decided to pause and redirect his focus. He cut unnecessary spending, invested in certifications that boosted his income, and built a routine centered on gym work, skill development, and quiet evenings reading or pursuing hobbies. His savings grew, his stress decreased. Friends commented on his improved demeanor and clarity. When he occasionally met someone new, he maintained firm boundaries from the start, communicating his standards openly. The experience taught him that his peace held more value than any temporary connection that demanded disproportionate investment. On the other side, consider a woman who built a successful career in marketing during her 20s. She enjoyed the freedom of travel, social events, and financial independence that came with her salary. Family and marriage remained future considerations while she focused on climbing the ladder. As inflation increased and her rent renewed at higher rates, she began tracking expenses more carefully. Dating became sporadic, with many men seeming less eager to plan elaborate outings or offer ongoing support. She reflected on conversations with friends who shared similar experiences of managing everything alone while watching costs rise. Over time, she adjusted her budget, explored remote work options for better balance, and started conversations about long term financial planning with trusted advisors. The process required honesty about trade offs, but also built new strengths in self reliance and strategic thinking. And these parallel journeys highlight a central truth. Individuals on both sides are responding to the same economic pressures and cultural shifts through personal choices. Men have largely chosen solitude and self focus as a protective and fulfilling strategy. Women are adapting by strengthening their own capabilities and reassessing priorities in light of current realities. Neither path is inherently right or wrong. Each reflects rational navigation of available incentives and observed outcomes. The key lies in maintaining personal accountability rather than assigning blanket blame. When people own their decisions and learn from experience, society gains the opportunity to evolve toward more balanced understandings of relationships and responsibilities. As we move further into this discussion, it becomes clear that the trend of men stepping back carries implications beyond individual lives. Family formation rates have shown changes in various data sets, with some regions reporting delayed marriages or lower birth numbers among certain demographics. Community structures that once relied on stable households for cohesion face new questions about long term sustainability. Economic models built around dual income assumptions encounter adjustments when more individuals choose single living. These shifts invite thoughtful examination rather than panic or accusation. They suggest the need for honest dialogue about what encourages healthy partnerships in the modern context, including economic policies that support affordability, legal frameworks that promote fairness, and cultural messages that value mutual respect over one sided narratives. Men who have found peace in their current path often describe a sense of liberation. They no longer feel the weight of constant performance or the fear of unpredictable outcomes in legal or social arenas. Their days belong to them in fuller measure. They allocate time and resources according to their own priorities rather than external demands. This freedom allows deeper engagement with passions, whether professional advancement, creative expression, physical fitness, or intellectual pursuits. Many report stronger friendships formed on shared values and genuine interests rather than transactional expectations. Solitude becomes a chosen state of clarity rather than a default of isolation. They discover that being alone does not equate to feeling lonely when inner contentment replaces the search for external completion. Women confronting these realities sometimes express a mix of frustration and determination. They see the dating market as more competitive or less responsive than in previous years. Some adjust by focusing intensely on career growth or skill acquisition to secure greater financial footing. Others explore communities or networks that provide mutual support without romantic involvement. A growing number emphasize the importance of financial literacy, emergency savings, and diversified income sources as essential tools for navigating uncertainty. These adaptations demonstrate strength and foresight. They reflect a willingness to confront changing conditions directly rather than waiting for external circumstances to revert. The process may involve difficult reflections on past choices, but it also opens doors to new forms of resilience and self mastery. The broader economic picture continues to influence these personal stories. Data on household debt, housing affordability, and wage growth relative to inflation paint a consistent picture of pressure on middle and working class budgets. Many families and individuals report working longer hours or multiple jobs simply to maintain current living standards. Single households face particular challenges when all responsibilities fall on one set of shoulders. In this context, the decision by men to minimize obligations and maximize personal security appears as a logical response rather than an act of withdrawal from society. They protect their resources and energy for the long term, understanding that economic volatility can persist for years. Women making similar calculations about their own stability contribute to a collective recalibration of expectations across gender lines. Rhetorically, one might ask what society gains when large numbers of capable individuals choose solitude over unbalanced partnerships. On one hand, personal peace and productivity may increase for those who step back. On the other, the social fabric that relies on family units and intergenerational support could face strains if the trend continues without counterbalancing forces. The answer likely lies in encouraging conditions that make mutual commitment attractive again. This includes addressing affordability issues so that young adults can realistically plan for homes and families. It involves legal reforms that restore confidence and fairness for all parties in relationship matters. It requires cultural conversations that celebrate balanced contributions rather than pitting groups against each other. Until those changes materialize, individuals will continue making choices that protect their own well being based on observable reality. And men have demonstrated through their actions that they can thrive without constant relational involvement. They build businesses, advance careers, maintain health, and cultivate meaningful, non romantic connections. Their minimalist lifestyles often result in lower stress and greater financial flexibility. They report higher life satisfaction when free from the drama sometimes associated with mismatched expectations. This does not mean they reject the idea of partnership entirely. Many remain open to connections that align with their values of respect, accountability, and shared purpose. They simply refuse to pursue or sustain dynamics that feel extractive or risky based on past patterns. This boundary setting represents growth in self awareness and emotional intelligence. Women adapting to the new landscape show parallel growth. Many invest in education or professional development to increase earning potential. They build support networks among friends and family that provide practical and emotional resources. They focus on health, financial planning, and personal development as foundations for stability. Some reconsider the timing of family goals or explore alternative paths to fulfillment that do not depend on traditional partnership models. These efforts highlight adaptability and strength in the face of economic and social shifts. The collective experience may ultimately lead to more realistic expectations on all sides, where individuals bring greater self sufficiency and clearer communication into any potential relationship. Continuing from that foundation, consider how these individual adaptations compound into larger societal observations that cannot be ignored. Men who embrace financial discipline discovered that every dollar saved from unnecessary social expenditures became fuel for their own security. They watched as housing costs continued their upward trajectory across major cities and suburban areas alike. Rents for modest one bedroom units in many metropolitan regions hovered well above historical norms, often requiring more than 30% of median earnings just to secure basic shelter. Utility bills fluctuated with seasonal demands, sometimes spiking during extreme weather to levels that strained even careful budgets. Transportation expenses, including fuel, insurance, and vehicle maintenance, added another consistent layer that consumed significant portions of monthly income for those reliant on personal vehicles to reach employment opportunities. Groceries, once a manageable weekly line item, now demanded strategic planning to maintain nutrition without excessive waste or compromise. These pressures affected single households with particular intensity because no shared income or division of responsibilities existed to distribute the load. In response, men streamlined their lives with intentional minimalism that went beyond mere frugality. They evaluated every recurring expense against its contribution to genuine well being and long term stability. Subscriptions, dining out, and lifestyle upgrades that once seemed essential lost their appeal when measured against the peace of a debt free existence or growing investment accounts. Many redirected those resources into skill enhancement programs, whether online certifications, trade workshops, or self paced learning that increased earning potential without requiring massive upfront debt. Others focused on physical health through consistent exercise routines that required little more than discipline and basic equipment, yielding improvements in energy, mental clarity, and overall resilience that no external validation could match. This internal focus created a virtuous cycle where better health supported sharper decision making, which in turn protected financial boundaries and reinforced the choice to prioritize self preservation over external demands. Women navigating the same economic landscape often shared accounts of tightening budgets and recalibrating expectations in public discussions and personal reflections. Some described The challenge of managing full rent, utilities, and daily necessities on a single income stream that had once felt sufficient during periods of lower inflation. Others spoke of the mental load involved in tracking every expense while simultaneously pursuing career advancement or side opportunities to create breathing room. These stories revealed a common thread of resourcefulness emerging under pressure. Women explored remote work arrangements that reduced commuting costs, negotiated with service providers for better rates, or built small networks for shared resources among trusted friends. The process highlighted the limits of solo navigation when costs rose faster than individual wages in many sectors. It also underscored the value of clear personal planning rather than reliance on shifting external circumstances or temporary assistance. One extended story illustrates the depth of these adjustments. A man in his early 30s had spent several years in a series of short term relationships where he consistently covered the majority of outings, provided small financial gestures during tough weeks, and managed much of the emotional coordination. Each cycle followed a similar pattern of initial enthusiasm, followed by growing expectations and eventual misalignment that left him carrying disproportionate costs in time and resources. After the most recent experience ended with additional complications around shared obligations, he made a deliberate decision to pause all romantic pursuits and redirect his full attention inward. He calculated his monthly expenses with precision, eliminating anything that did not serve his core goals of debt reduction and skill building. He increased his contributions to retirement accounts and began a side project in digital content creation that aligned with his technical background, generating supplemental income without demanding constant social interaction. Evenings, once spent planning dates or responding to messages, now belonged to reading, strength training, and quiet reflection that restored his sense of control. Over 18 months, his financial position strengthened noticeably. His stress levels dropped as he no longer navigated mismatched expectations. Friends noticed his calmer demeanor and sharper focus at work, where his performance earned a promotion that further reinforced his path. When occasional opportunities for connection arose, he approached them with clear standards rooted in mutual respect and demonstrated compatibility rather than the old pressure to prove worth through provision. Parallel experiences emerged among women confronting similar economic headwinds. A professional in marketing who had built a solid career through her 20s found herself in her mid 30s facing renewed rent increases and healthcare costs that eroded previous comfort margins. She had delayed family considerations while focusing on promotions and networking events that once delivered both income and social fulfillment. As monthly calculations grew tighter, she began tracking every category with greater discipline, exploring freelance opportunities that offered flexibility around her primary role, and connecting with colleagues for shared strategies on budgeting and career mobility. The shift required honest assessment of trade offs, including the recognition that independence carried real ongoing demands without the buffer of shared responsibilities. She invested in additional certifications that enhanced her marketability and opened doors to roles with better compensation structures. Over time, these steps created incremental stability that reduced reliance on any single income source or external support. Her story reflected broader patterns where individuals adapted by strengthening personal capabilities rather than waiting for systemic relief or relational rescue. These personal narratives multiply across diverse backgrounds and regions, revealing consistent themes without assigning collective blame. Men who stepped back described the relief of no longer feeling responsible for managing someone else's financial or emotional equilibrium alongside their own. They spoke of rediscovering simple satisfactions in routines built around purpose rather than performance. Solitude allowed space for genuine self acceptance that previous relational dynamics sometimes obscured through constant negotiation. Many reported improved sleep, clearer thinking, and stronger commitment to long term visions once the noise of mismatched expectations quieted. This internal security translated into healthier boundaries in all interactions, including professional ones, where focused energy often led to measurable advancements. Economic indicators continued to underscore the wisdom of these protective choices. Household debt levels remained elevated nationally, with credit card balances in particular reaching records as individuals bridged gaps between earnings and essential costs. Housing affordability metrics showed median home prices maintaining multiples far above traditional income ratios in many markets, pushing first time ownership further into later decades for those pursuing it. Utility and transportation expenses formed what many described as a second layer of rent, consuming budgets with little flexibility for savings or discretionary spending. Food costs, while fluctuating, demanded careful portioning and planning to avoid waste that could tip monthly balances into deficit. In this environment, men who minimized lifestyle inflation and maximized resource retention created natural buffers against volatility. They avoided the additional strain that often accompanied efforts to sustain relationships under unequal contribution models. Their minimalist approaches aligned with observable reality rather than idealized narratives, allowing steady progress even when broader economic conditions remain challenging. Women adapting to parallel pressures frequently emphasized the development of greater financial literacy and strategic foresight. Some returned to educational opportunities or skill workshops that promised higher returns on time invested. Others built emergency funds through consistent small contributions, recognizing that solo households required larger personal safety nets when no secondary income existed. Community discussions sometimes touched on the value of diversified income streams, whether through side ventures, remote gigs, or negotiated salary adjustments that accounted for rising living expenses. These efforts demonstrated proactive responses to conditions that affected everyone navigating high costs without shared structures. The emphasis remained on personal agency, where individuals assessed their unique situations and made decisions that promoted stability rather than external rescue. Rhetorically, the question arises of what balanced participation looks like when economic realities demand more effort for baseline survival. Men answered through actions that prioritized self mastery and peace over continued investment in dynamics that previously yielded inconsistent returns. They learned that observable patterns of behavior carried more weight than verbal assurances or cultural expectations. This pattern recognition protected them from repeating cycles that drained resources without building mutual foundations. Women, facing the same data points on costs and wages, often responded by enhancing their own capabilities and clarifying personal standards for any future involvement. Both paths reflected rational navigation rather than defeat or entitlement. The shared economic landscape invited clearer communication and accountability on all sides, where contributions aligned with demonstrated value rather than assumed roles. Another layer of the story involves the role of technology and social platforms in shaping these dynamics. Men who reduced their engagement with dating applications or constant online interactions reported significant gains in mental clarity and time availability. They redirected hours previously spent scrolling or crafting responses into productive activities that compounded over months. Fitness progress accelerated, side projects reached milestones, and financial tracking became habitual rather than reactive. The absence of algorithmic prompts designed to encourage endless pursuit allowed space for authentic self direction. Women who adjusted their own online presence sometimes noted shifts toward content focused on practical skills, budgeting strategies, or career development rather than appeals for attention or support. These changes reflected broader adaptation, where individuals use tools selectively to enhance personal growth instead of seeking validation through digital metrics. Longer term reflections reveal the compounding benefits of consistent choices. Men who maintained their path for multiple years often described a profound sense of freedom that extended beyond finances. They cultivated hobbies that brought intrinsic joy, whether woodworking, reading extensively, exploring local trails, or mastering musical instruments. These pursuits required minimal external input, yet delivered ongoing satisfaction that relational negotiations sometimes disrupted. Physical health improvements supported sustained energy for ambitious goals, creating a feedback loop of capability and contentment. Social circles narrowed to genuine connections based on shared interests and reliability rather than obligatory participation. The peace achieved in solitude proved restorative, allowing deeper appreciation for life's simpler elements without the pressure of constant performance. Women confronting sustained economic pressures similarly developed strengths through sustained effort. Many prioritized debt reduction strategies that freed future income for flexibility rather than survival. They explored entrepreneurial ideas that matched their skills and offered control over schedules and earnings. Health and wellness routines became anchors that supported resilience during tighter months. Networks of mutual support among friends provided practical assistance and encouragement without romantic complications. These adaptations highlighted the capacity for growth when individuals faced realities directly and took ownership of their trajectories. The process often involved uncomfortable reflections on past decisions, yet it also opened pathways to new forms of independence and purpose. As broader conversations continue, the importance of personal accountability stands out with increasing clarity. Men who walked away did so after weighing cumulative experiences against potential benefits and choosing the option that preserved their well being. They did not vanish from society, but redirected their contributions towards self directed endeavors that benefited their own stability and, indirectly, their communities through focused productivity. Women adapting to the landscape demonstrated parallel accountability by strengthening internal resources and adjusting expectations to match current conditions. Neither response required vilification of the other. Each represented thoughtful responses to observable incentives, legal frameworks, cultural signals, and economic data. The collective outcome may encourage future dialogues that emphasize mutual respect, clear standards, and realistic planning for shared challenges like affordability and stability. Further stories add texture to these patterns. A tradesman in his late 20s had previously invested significant time and money in relationships that demanded frequent gestures while offering limited reciprocity in practical or emotional terms. After one particularly draining experience involving unexpected financial entanglements, he calculated the true cost of his involvement and decided on a full reset. He focused intensely on mastering his craft, earning additional credentials that boosted his hourly rate and opened overtime opportunities. He maintained a simple living arrangement that kept overhead low, allowing rapid debt payoff and the beginning of investment contributions. Weekends, once allocated to social obligations, now supported restoration through outdoor activities and skill practice. Within 2 years, his financial position had transformed from strained to secure. His confidence grew as he no longer felt the weight of mismatched expectations. When new acquaintances expressed interest, he maintained firm boundaries that protected his progress and communicated his values openly from the outset. A woman working in administrative support faced similar tightening margins when her rent renewed at a higher rate and utility costs climbed with regional demand. She had built a respectable career path, but recognized that solo expenses left little margin for unexpected events. She began a methodical review of all recurring costs, negotiating where possible and eliminating non essentials that did not serve core needs. She pursued additional training in specialized software that increased her value to employers and led to a role with better compensation and remote flexibility. Evenings became opportunities for budgeting reviews and small side tasks that generated extra income without disrupting recovery time. The adjustments required discipline, but gradually created breathing room that reduced daily anxiety. She developed greater appreciation for strategic planning and self reliance, recognizing that these tools provided stability regardless of relationship status. These accounts, multiplied across countless individuals, illustrate the power of consistent, self directed action in challenging environments. Men prioritizing peace discovered that solitude fostered creativity, discipline, and long term vision unclouded by external drama. Women strengthening their foundations found new depths of resilience and capability that served them well across all life domains. The economic cost of living continued to test everyone, yet those who adapted through personal ownership rather than expectation of rescue positioned themselves for greater sustainability. The trend invites ongoing reflection on what conditions would encourage healthier mutual participation, including policies that improve affordability, legal structures that promote fairness, and cultural emphasis on balanced contributions over one sided narratives. Technology further influenced these shifts by providing tools for self education and income diversification that reduced reliance on traditional pathways. Men accessed free or low cost resources for learning trades, investing basics, or building digital skills that enhanced independence. They formed loose communities around shared interests that offered camaraderie without relational complexity. Women similarly leveraged online platforms for skill development, budgeting communities, and career networking that supported solo stability. These digital avenues democratized access to knowledge, allowing individuals to strengthen their positions without waiting for systemic overhaul. The result was a quiet but measurable increase in personal agency across those who chose focused adaptation. Looking toward sustained outcomes, men who maintained their chosen path often reported profound satisfaction in lives built on their own terms. They experienced the freedom of allocating resources according to personal priorities rather than external pressures. Health improvements compounded into greater vitality that supported ambitious pursuits. Creative or intellectual interests flourished in the absence of constant negotiation. The peace of solitude revealed itself as a foundation for authentic contentment rather than a temporary state. Many remained open to future connections that aligned with high standards of mutual respect and shared accountability, yet they refused to compromise their hard earned equilibrium for anything less. Women who embraced strategic adaptation similarly cultivated strengths that enhanced their navigation of economic realities. They developed robust financial habits that created security buffers against volatility. Career or entrepreneurial efforts gained momentum through consistent application. Support networks provided practical resilience without dependency. The process fostered deeper self knowledge and confidence in their ability to direct their own trajectories. These developments contributed to a collective recalibration where expectations grew more aligned with demonstrable realities on all sides. The broader economic context of rising costs for housing, utilities, transportation, food, and debt service continued to shape individual decisions with unrelenting clarity. Men protecting their resources through disciplined minimalism created natural defenses against these pressures. Women enhancing self sufficiency through skill building and strategic planning develop parallel defenses. Both approaches reflected rational responses to data rather than emotional reactions. The shared challenge of affordability invited thoughtful consideration of solutions that support stability for those pursuing independent or partnered paths alike. Personal stories of adaptation serve as powerful illustrations that agency remains available even when external conditions test limits. The ongoing economic pressures continue to expose the limits of solo financial navigation in an environment where costs for essential goods and services rise steadily without corresponding widespread wage adjustments. Men who maintain strict boundaries around their resources and time create measurable protection against these forces by keeping their monthly obligations minimal and predictable. This approach allows consistent allocation toward savings, skill development, and long term security measures that compound over years rather than being eroded by repeated external demands. The pattern recognition that guides these choices stems from accumulated observations of mismatched expectations in social and economic interactions, leading many to prioritize self directed stability over participation in systems that historically extracted disproportionate value without balanced return. As inflation persists and the cost of living crisis deepens across housing, utilities, transportation, and daily necessities, this disciplined withdrawal from unbalanced dynamics reveals itself as a rational response that preserves individual capacity for sustained progress. Women encountering the same sustained cost increases often adjust their strategies through heightened focus on income optimization and expense control, recognizing that independence requires continuous management rather than a static achievement. The workforce participation that once appeared as a complete solution now confronts the reality of elevated baseline expenses that consume larger portions of earnings, particularly for those managing all responsibilities without shared structures. This leads to broader societal conversations about the sustainability of models that emphasize career advancement while downplaying the practical value of mutual support during periods of economic strain. Observable data on household expenses shows that single income arrangements face tighter margins when every category, from shelter to food security, must be covered independently, prompting a collective reevaluation of priorities and trade offs across all groups. Rhetorically, one must consider how decades of cultural emphasis on complete self sufficiency intersect with the current reality of runaway living costs and persistent inflation. Men have responded by redirecting their efforts inward, building financial buffers and personal systems that reduce vulnerability to external volatility. This shift allows them to maintain control over their resources and energy, avoiding scenarios where attention and capital are drawn into interactions that offer limited reciprocity or long term alignment. The resulting peace and solitude emerges not as isolation, but as a deliberate state where clarity and purpose replace the constant management of conflicting expectations. Such choices reflect a deeper understanding that observable behaviors and economic outcomes carry more weight than repeated assurances or societal pressure to resume traditional roles without corresponding changes in dynamics. The legal and institutional frameworks that evolved over previous decades further influence these decisions by increasing perceived risks in areas such as family matters, financial obligations, and public interactions. Men observe patterns where systems sometimes favor extraction of resources long after initial commitments end, leading to cautious approaches that prioritize protection of assets and autonomy. This caution extends to everyday social engagement, where public recording, group discussions, or shifting norms around initiation create additional layers of hesitation. Rather than fighting these structures directly, many men simply step back, focusing instead on areas where they retain full agency and where outcomes align more closely with invested effort. The result is a quiet but widespread redirection of masculine energy towards self mastery, professional excellence, and minimalist lifestyles that emphasize necessity over excess. Economic indicators paint a consistent picture that reinforces these individual calculations. Housing affordability continues to challenge budgets in both urban centers and surrounding regions, with median costs for basic shelter requiring substantial portions of income, even for modest accommodations. Utility expenses fluctuate with energy demands and seasonal factors, often adding unexpected burdens during peak periods. Transportation costs, including fuel and maintenance, form another significant line item that impacts daily mobility for employment and errands. Food prices for nutritious staples demand careful planning to avoid quality compromises that affect long term health. When combined with existing debt service from education or consumer sources, these factors create an environment where single households must operate with exceptional discipline to maintain equilibrium. Men who have already minimized their exposure to additional relational costs find themselves better positioned to weather these conditions without compromising their core stability. Women navigating identical pressures frequently emphasize the development of diversified income strategies and rigorous budgeting practices to create necessary buffers. The illusion of effortless independence promoted in earlier cultural narratives now faces the test of real world arithmetic, where earnings must cover the full spectrum of modern living expenses without supplemental support. This confrontation with observable limits encourages stronger emphasis on career mobility, skill enhancement, and expense optimization as essential tools for sustained self reliance. The broader trend highlights that economic realities do not adjust to ideological preferences, but instead demand practical adaptation from all participants, regardless of prior messaging about autonomy or provision. As these patterns solidify, the societal conversation gradually shifts toward questions of balance and accountability rather than restoration of old models. Men who have walked away from unbalanced interactions demonstrate through their continued progress that solitude can foster genuine contentment and productive focus when freed from the weight of mismatched expectations. Their minimalist approaches allow resources to accumulate rather than dissipate, creating space for investments in health, knowledge, and purpose driven activities that deliver intrinsic rewards. This redirection challenges earlier assumptions that masculine contributions were inherently tied to external provision, revealing instead that men thrive when directing their efforts according to internal standards and observable returns. The cost of living crisis, far from being a temporary fluctuation, has become a defining feature of the current era, amplifying the consequences of decisions made during more favorable economic periods. Women who invested prime years in workforce advancement and credential accumulation now confront the compounded effects of debt, delayed family formation, and rising expenses that strain solo budgets. The workforce delivered certain opportunities and earnings, yet it could not fully substitute for the shared economic load that stable partnerships historically provided during difficult seasons. This gap becomes more apparent as inflation erodes purchasing power and essential costs continue their upward trajectory, prompting honest assessments of trade offs that were sometimes downplayed in earlier empowerment narratives. Men, having observed these developments with clear eyes, continue to trust pattern recognition over appeals for renewed engagement. They see through dynamics where attention, time, and money are requested without corresponding commitment or reciprocity, choosing instead to conserve their resources for self preservation and personal growth. This stance is not rooted in opposition, but in a pragmatic evaluation of incentives and outcomes that have accumulated over time. By maintaining distance from transactional or one sided interactions, men protect their mental clarity and financial position, allowing them to focus on pursuits that align with their own values and deliver measurable satisfaction. Broader economic data supports the wisdom of such protective strategies. National figures on household debt show persistent elevation, particularly in categories that reflect everyday survival rather than luxury. Wage growth in many sectors lags behind the combined impact of inflation and shelter costs, making careful resource allocation critical for long term security. Men who operate with minimalist principles often maintain lower break even points, giving them greater resilience when external conditions tighten further. This approach enables steady advancement in areas under their direct control, from career development to physical conditioning to knowledge acquisition, without the distraction of managing additional responsibilities that lack mutual foundation. Women responding to the same data points increasingly prioritize financial education, debt management techniques, and income diversification as core components of sustainable independence. The recognition that solo navigation carries inherent limits in a high cost environment encourages proactive measures that build internal strength rather than reliance on external rescue. These adaptations reflect a maturing perspective that acknowledges economic pressures as shared challenges requiring individual discipline and strategic planning from everyone involved. The shift away from earlier promises of effortless self sufficiency toward practical self mastery represents a necessary adjustment to observable realities. Rhetorically, the question persists about how society can realign incentives to encourage healthier forms of participation without forcing unbalanced burdens onto any group. Men have demonstrated their willingness to step back entirely when patterns suggest disproportionate risk or extraction, highlighting the importance of fairness and mutual value in any potential reconnection. Legal frameworks, cultural norms, and economic policies all play roles in shaping these calculations, and until they evolve to restore confidence across the board, individual withdrawal will likely continue as a dominant strategy for self protection. This does not signal the end of all interaction, but rather a period of necessary recalibration where choices are guided by direct experience rather than idealized expectations. The emphasis on observable reality as the ultimate guide becomes even more pronounced as economic volatility persists. Men who have embraced solitude report greater control over their daily lives and future trajectories, free from the uncertainty that once accompanied constant social negotiation. Their energy flows toward productive outlets that compound into tangible benefits, whether through professional achievement, health optimization, or pursuit of meaningful interests. This internal focus creates a foundation of peace that proves more durable than temporary relational highs built on mismatched foundations. The collective movement toward self reliance challenges previous cultural scripts that position men primarily as providers while questioning their intrinsic value in other domains. Women confronting the full weight of sustained living costs often develop heightened awareness of budgeting precision and career sustainability as essential survival tools. The workforce path, while offering independence in certain respects, exposes participants to the same inflationary forces without automatic safeguards against erosion of purchasing power. This reality prompts deeper consideration of how personal choices around timing, debt accumulation, and lifestyle expectations interact with broader economic conditions. The resulting strategies emphasize building robust personal systems that can withstand periods of strain, fostering a form of self sufficiency that is earned through consistent effort rather than assumed by default. As the cost of living crisis continues without clear resolution from leadership, the divergence in adaptive responses becomes more defined. Men prioritize preservation of resources and mental bandwidth, creating buffers that allow them to thrive even as external pressures mount. Their minimalist lifestyles strip away unnecessary complications, focusing instead on elements that deliver direct value and long term stability. This approach aligns with natural tendencies toward efficiency and self containment, enabling progress that feels authentic and sustainable. The peace achieved through these choices stands in contrast to earlier periods where efforts were frequently directed outward without proportional returns. The broader societal impact of these shifts invites examination of how family formation, community structures, and economic participation may evolve under continued pressure. When large numbers of capable individuals opt for solitude and self focus, traditional models of shared responsibility face natural tests of viability. Women adapting through strength and self reliance contribute to a landscape where expectations must adjust to reflect actual conditions rather than nostalgic or ideological preferences. The conversation benefits when it centers on practical solutions that address affordability, fairness in institutional systems, and clear communication of mutual standards. Until such adjustments occur, personal decisions will continue to be driven by the imperative of self preservation in an environment that rewards caution and discipline. Economic realities ultimately serve as the great equalizer, revealing the practical limits of any narrative that ignores the arithmetic of daily survival. Men who have walked away demonstrate that redirecting energy inward can yield stability and contentment when external dynamics lack balance. Women facing the same calculations increasingly recognize the need for comprehensive personal strategies that account for both opportunities and constraints in the modern economy. This shared confrontation with observable facts fosters a more grounded perspective across groups, where accountability replaces assumption and direct experience guides future choices. The intensity of the current moment reflects the depth of preceding imbalances, yet it also opens space for more authentic realignment based on reality rather than rhetoric. The path forward remains one of individual agency exercised within the boundaries of immeasurable conditions. Men maintaining their stance of selective engagement protect their hard won equilibrium while continuing to advance in domains under their control. Women building parallel strengths through disciplined adaptation position themselves for greater resilience amid ongoing cost pressures. Society as a whole gains when these choices are understood as rational responses to incentives rather than acts of withdrawal or entitlement. The emphasis stays on clarity, personal responsibility, and alignment with observable outcomes that promote sustainable progress for those willing to engage directly with reality. Shout out to the 1 hour gang. What did you think about what was discussed here? Do you agree with the observations on these changing dynamics and economic realities? Leave a comment on the video sharing your thoughts and experiences so others can benefit from the conversation. Like the video if you like it, don't forget to subscribe, and if you like the video, share the video, and just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.